I was standing in my backyard watching smoke curl out of my 130-year-old smokehouse chimney when Patricia Henderson appeared at my fence line with her clipboard, and that expression that meant someone's day was about to get ruined. Mine, apparently. "Frank Whitmore, that structure is not up to code," she announced, not even bothering with a greeting. "I've reviewed the architectural guidelines for Meadowbrook Commons, and nowhere does it authorize a decrepit wooden shed emitting smoke." I turned slowly, taking a deep breath to keep my temper in check. I'd been smoking a brisket for my daughter's birthday party that weekend, something I'd done dozens of times since moving to this Nashville suburb 3 years ago. The smokehouse had been on the property when I bought it, a beautiful piece of history that the previous owner had maintained meticulously. The real estate agent had actually highlighted it as a unique feature. "Patricia, it's not a shed, it's a smokehouse. It was built in 1893, and it's been here longer than this entire neighborhood." "That may be," she said, flipping through papers on her clipboard. "But according to Section 7, Paragraph 12 of the HOA covenants, any outdoor structure must be approved by the Architectural Review Board." "I have no record of any such approval." "Because it predates the HOA by about 90 years, I said, walking over to the fence. "This property was part of the old Whitfield farm. When they subdivided the land in 2004, this house and the smokehouse were grandfathered in. It's all in my title documents." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. She was probably in her mid-50s, with that particular hairstyle that seemed mandatory for HOA board presidents across America, short, heavily sprayed, and somehow both blonde and gray at the same time. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't care what some dusty old papers say. That structure is an eyesore and a fire hazard. I'm giving you 30 days to remove it. You can't be serious. Completely serious. 30 days or the HOA will take action." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her golf cart, leaving me standing there with smoke still rising peacefully from my smokehouse chimney. I went inside and pulled out all my closing documents, spreading them across the kitchen table. Sure enough, there it was in black and white. The smokehouse was specifically mentioned as a historic structure on the property, predating the HOA, with preservation rights explicitly protected. I scanned the relevant pages and sent them to Patricia's email with a polite but firm message explaining that she had no authority over the structure. Her response came back in less than an hour. "The board will review at our next meeting. Until then, cease all use of the structure immediately." I didn't cease anything. I finished my brisket, and it turned out perfect, tender, smoky, with a bark that made my daughter Emma squeal with delight at her party. But the whole time, I had this knot in my stomach. I'd heard the stories about HOAs gone rogue, but I'd always figured they were exaggerated. Our neighborhood seemed pretty reasonable for the most part. Patricia was intense, sure, but I'd never had a direct run-in with her before. The board meeting was on a Thursday evening at the community center. I showed up with my documents in a folder, feeling confident. The board consisted of Patricia, a retired accountant named Douglas Murphy, and a younger woman named Jennifer Stone, who'd always seemed sensible when I'd talked to her at neighborhood barbecues. Patricia called the meeting to order with all the gravity of someone presiding over the United Nations. She went through various items. Someone's mailbox needed repainting. Another resident had parked a boat in their driveway for more than 48 hours. Someone else had planted flowers in colors not on the approved palette. Then she got to me. Item 7. The unauthorized structure at 1847 Maple Ridge Drive. She said it like I was harboring a nuclear reactor. I raised my hand. "I'd like to address the board." Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. "You have 3 minutes." I stood and distributed copies of my documents. As you can see, the smokehouse is explicitly protected in my title. It's a historic structure, built in 1893 as part of the original Whitfield farm. When this land was developed, my property retained these rights specifically, because of the historical significance. The HOA has no authority over it. Douglas studied the papers, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. This does seem pretty clear, Patricia. It doesn't matter, Patricia said sharply. The structure violates our community standards. It's old, it's wooden, and it produces smoke. Several neighbors have complained. Which neighbors? I asked. That's confidential. I'd like their names if they're making complaints about my property. Patricia's face reddened. The board has decided that the structure must be removed within 30 days. If you fail to comply, we'll be forced to take action. What action? You can't touch it, it's protected. We'll see about that, Patricia said coldly. This board meeting is adjourned. I left feeling angry and unsettled. Jennifer caught up with me in the parking lot. Frank, I'm sorry. I tried to argue that we should at least consult with the HOA attorney before making any decisions, but Patricia pushed for an immediate vote. It was 2-1. So you voted against it, of course. Your documentation is solid. But Patricia has been on a crusade lately about maintaining property values. Between you and me, I think she's just bored and needs something to control. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that smokehouse. My grandfather had taught me how to smoke meat when I was a kid, and when I'd found this property with its own historic smokehouse, it had felt like fate. I'd spent hours restoring it, learning its quirks, figuring out how to maintain the temperature just right. Emma loved helping me, learning the same traditions my grandfather had taught me. The thought of losing it made my chest tight. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney named Michael Cohen, who'd been recommended by a friend. I explained the situation, and he asked me to bring in all my documents. His office was in downtown Nashville, a sleek modern space that smelled like leather and coffee. Michael reviewed everything carefully, taking his time. He was probably 40, with the kind of calm demeanor that made you feel like your problems weren't so insurmountable. Frank, you're absolutely in the right here. The HOA has no leg to stand on. This smokehouse is explicitly protected. I can send them a letter making that crystal clear if you'd like. Please. Maybe that'll get Patricia to back off. He drafted a letter that afternoon, and I approved it before he sent it via certified mail. It was thorough and professional, explaining in legal terms that any attempt to force removal of the smokehouse would be a violation of my property rights and could result in legal action against the HOA and its board members personally. I figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I was at work. I'm a civil engineer for the Tennessee Department of Transportation when my neighbor, an elderly man named George Martinez, called me. Frank, you need to get home right now. There's a crew with a bulldozer in your backyard. What? The HOA sent them. They're about to demolish your smokehouse. I told my boss it was an emergency and broke about 15 traffic laws getting home. When I pulled into my driveway, I could see the yellow bulk of a small bulldozer parked on my lawn, its treads tearing up the grass. 3 men in work clothes stood around it, and Patricia Henderson was there too, pointing and directing them like some kind of deranged general. I ran into the backyard. What the hell do you think you're doing? Patricia turned with a satisfied smile. Mr. Whitmore. We're removing the unauthorized structure, as we informed you we would. You have no right to be on my property. This is trespassing. The HOA covenants grant us access to enforce community standards. Not for protected structures. I have legal documentation. Your 30 days are up. We're proceeding. One of the workers, a burly guy with a graying beard, looked uncomfortable. "Madam, if the owner's saying we don't have permission, maybe we should wait until this gets sorted out." "You're being paid to do a job," Patricia snapped. "Do it." I pulled out my phone. "If that bulldozer moves 1 inch closer to my smokehouse, I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Patricia said. "We have every right to be here." I dialed 911. "I need police at 1847 Maple Ridge Drive. There are people trespassing on my property, attempting to destroy my building." The operator said units were on the way. The workers looked at each other nervously. One of them said, "Lady, I don't want to get arrested for tearing down a building we're not supposed to touch." "You won't be arrested. I'm the HOA president and I'm authorizing this." "That doesn't give you the right to destroy my property," I said, standing between the bulldozer and the smokehouse. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The smokehouse stood there behind me, solid and weathered, smoke stains darkening the bricks around the chimney from decades of use. It was beautiful in its way, a piece of history that deserved respect. 2 police cruisers pulled up within 5 minutes. Officers Sarah Jennings and Marcus Thompson got out, and I recognized them from the community barbecue the previous summer. They surveyed the scene with professional calm. "What's going on here?" Officer Jennings asked. Patricia launched into her explanation before I could speak. "We're the HOA removing a code violation. This resident was given proper notice and failed to comply." "That's not true," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is a historic structure that's protected by my title. The HOA has no authority over it, and they're trespassing. I have legal documentation and a letter from my attorney spelling this all out. The HOA was informed of this in writing." Officer Thompson asked to see the documentation. I pulled up the attorney's letter on my phone, then went inside to get the physical copies of my title documents. While I was doing that, I could hear Patricia arguing with the officers, her voice getting shriller. When I came back out, Officer Jennings was examining the documents carefully. She looked at Patricia. "Madam, do you have anything showing you have the right to demolish this structure?" "The HOA covenants give us. You have documentation specifically authorizing you to remove this particular building from this property." Patricia's face was turning red. "The board voted. That's not what I asked. From what I'm seeing here, this gentleman has clear documentation that this structure is protected. Do you have documentation contradicting that?" "We don't need." "Then I'm going to have to ask your crew to leave the property," Officer Thompson said firmly. "This appears to be a civil matter that needs to be resolved through the courts, not through self-help remedies. If you proceed with the demolition, I'll have no choice but to charge everyone involved with criminal trespassing and destruction of property." The workers didn't need to be told twice. They started packing up immediately. The bulldozer operator began moving his equipment back toward the trailer. Patricia was furious. "This is ridiculous. I'm the HOA president. I have the authority to maintain community standards." "Madam, you need to leave this property now," Officer Jennings said. "If you have a legal dispute with the homeowner, you need to resolve it through the proper legal channels." "I'm calling the HOA attorney," Patricia hissed at me. "You haven't heard the last of this." "Looking forward to it," I said. After everyone left and the police took statements for their report, I stood in my backyard looking at the deep ruts the bulldozer had left in my lawn. George came over from next door. "That was intense, Frank. I'm glad I called you when I did." "Thanks, George." Another 10 minutes and my smokehouse would have been rubble. Patricia's lost her mind. I've lived in this neighborhood since it was developed, and she's gotten worse every year. Power went to her head. I called Michael Cohen and told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Frank, They actually brought equipment onto your property and attempted to demolish a protected structure. Even after receiving my letter. Yes, if I hadn't gotten here in time, it would be gone. This is serious. This isn't just an HOA overstepping its bounds. This is destruction of property, trespassing, possibly even criminal mischief. And if that structure is genuinely historic, there might be other protections in place that they violated. What do you mean? When was it built again? 1893. Yes. And its original construction, not rebuilt, as far as I know. The previous owner maintained it, but it's the original structure. Frank, that might qualify for the National Register of Historic Places, or at least State Historic Registry. If it is, and they attempted to destroy it, that's a whole different level of trouble. Let me do some research. I spent the rest of the evening documenting everything, taking photos of the bulldozer tracks in my yard, the tire marks on my lawn, the damage to my fence where they'd opened the gate without permission. I wrote down everything that had been said while it was fresh in my memory. Emma came over that evening. She was 24 and lived in an apartment in East Nashville, and I told her what had happened. Her face went pale. Dad, they almost destroyed Grandpa's smokehouse. Not Grandpa's exactly, but yeah, the one that means the same thing to us. She hugged me tight. We can't let them win. That place is special. The next morning, Michael called me with news that changed everything. Frank, I did some research on your property. I pulled up the historical surveys of the Whitfield farm, looked into the original construction records for the Davidson County area, and I found something interesting. Your smokehouse isn't just old, it's architecturally significant. It's one of only 3 remaining brick smokehouses from that era in the county that are still in original condition. The Whitfield family were early settlers, and that farm was historically important to the development of the area. So, what does that mean? It means we can apply to get it listed on the Tennessee State Register of Historic Places, possibly even the National Register. If we can get that designation, it would come with serious protections. The HOA wouldn't just be violating your property rights. If they touched it, they'd be violating state and potentially federal historic preservation laws. How long does that take? The process can take several months for the full review, but we can request an emergency preliminary designation given the immediate threat. I have a contact at the Tennessee Historical Commission. Let me make some calls. While Michael worked his legal magic, I had to deal with the immediate fallout. The HOA sent me a formal letter demanding I pay for the enforcement action, essentially billing me for the bulldozer that had tried to destroy my property. The amount was $3,000. I laughed when I read it, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh you make when something is so absurd you don't know how else to respond. I forwarded it to Michael, who said, "Don't pay a cent. In fact, we're going to countersue for damages to your lawn and emotional distress." 3 days later, Michael called with incredible news. Frank, the Tennessee Historical Commission has issued an emergency preliminary protection order for your smokehouse. It's officially recognized as a structure of potential historical significance, pending full review. This means any attempt to demolish, alter, or damage it would be a violation of state historic preservation laws. The penalties include fines up to $10,000 and possible criminal charges. You're kidding. I'm not. And there's more. The commission is sending an investigator out to do a full assessment. If they confirm what I found in my research, your smokehouse will get full state historic designation, possibly National Register designation. This is a big deal, Frank. I felt this weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't fully realized was there. So Patricia can't touch it. Patricia can't breathe on it without breaking the law. I'm sending her and the HOA board a new letter right now, informing them of the protection order. I'm also recommending that you file a formal complaint with the police about the attempted demolition, and that we pursue a restraining order against the HOA to prevent any further harassment. The investigator from the Tennessee Historical Commission arrived on Saturday morning. Her name was Dr. Eleanor Walsh, and she was a small woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a passion for old buildings that reminded me of how people talk about their favorite sports teams. She spent 2 hours examining every inch of the smokehouse, taking measurements, photos, and samples of the mortar. "Mr. Whitmore, this is exceptional," she said, running her hand along the brick walls. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary. See how the bricks are laid. This is Flemish bond pattern, which was common in the late 19th century but rare for utilitarian structures like smokehouses. Someone with real skill built this, and these interior hooks for hanging meat, they're hand-forged iron. Original. The whole structure is remarkably intact. The previous owner took good care of it. Someone did, and I'm glad. This is exactly the kind of historic structure that gets lost because people don't realize what they have. The fact that your HOA tried to demolish it," she shook her head. "That's a tragedy we almost had on our hands, but it's not going to happen now. I'm recommending full state historic designation, and I'm going to personally advocate for National Register listing. This smokehouse is a piece of Tennessee history." After she left, I sat on my back porch just looking at the building. It stood there solid and proud, its red bricks warm in the afternoon sun. The door was slightly weathered, with iron hardware that had been hand-forged by someone whose name I'd never know. Inside, the walls were darkened by more than a century of smoke, each layer telling a story of families who'd preserved their food there, who'd gathered around to share meals prepared with meat that came from that chamber. Patricia Henderson's golf cart appeared at my fence line again that afternoon. I watched her sit there for a long moment, staring at the smokehouse with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then she drove away without saying a word. Michael filed the restraining order on Monday, and we got a court date for the following week. We also filed a civil suit against the HOA for trespassing, attempted destruction of property, and violation of my deed restrictions. The suit named Patricia personally, along with Douglas Murphy, as board members who had authorized the illegal action. The story got picked up by the local news. A reporter named Alicia Grant from News Channel 5 called me for an interview. I was hesitant at first, but Michael said it might actually help. Public pressure could force the HOA to back off completely. The interview aired on Thursday evening. Alicia did a great job showing the smokehouse, explaining its history, and interviewing Dr. Walsh about its significance. Then she interviewed Patricia, which was where things got interesting. "Miss Henderson, Mr. Whitmore has documentation showing his smokehouse is protected by his deed and now by state historic preservation law. Why did the HOA attempt to demolish it?" Patricia's smile was tight and fake. "We were simply trying to maintain property values in our community. Mr. Whitmore has been uncooperative with reasonable requests to address concerns about that old structure. But it's not just old, is it? It's historically significant. Experts say it's one of only 3 remaining smokehouses of its kind in the county. I'm not aware of that. The Tennessee Historical Commission issued an emergency protection order. Were you aware of that before you sent a bulldozer to Mr. Whitmore's property?" "We were acting within our authority as an HOA. Even after Mr. Whitmore's attorney sent a letter explaining that you had no such authority." Patricia's face tightened. "This interview is over." The segment ended with Alicia standing in front of the Meadowbrook Commons sign, explaining that the HOA had declined to provide their governing documents or any evidence that they had authority over historic structures. It was damning, and the comments online were overwhelmingly on my side. The restraining order hearing was almost anticlimactic. Patricia showed up with a lawyer, a tired-looking man named Gregory Sloan, who seemed like he was already regretting taking the case. Michael presented our evidence, including police reports, photos, witness statements from George, and the documentation from the Tennessee Historical Commission. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that the HOA had acted in good faith based on their interpretation of their covenants, but the judge wasn't having it. Miss Henderson, you received a letter from Mr. Whitmore's attorney explicitly stating that your HOA had no authority over this structure. You received documentation supporting this claim, yet you proceeded to enter his property with heavy equipment and attempted to demolish a building that is now under state historic protection. Can you explain your reasoning? Patricia stood up. Your Honor, I'm the HOA president. It's my job to maintain property values and enforce our covenants. That structure is an eyesore it's a historically significant building, the judge interrupted. And it was protected by Mr. Whitmore's deed long before it received state designation. This court finds that your actions were not taken in good faith, that you knowingly violated Mr. Whitmore's property rights, and that you present a continued threat to his protected property. I'm granting the restraining order. You and any agents of the HOA are prohibited from entering Mr. Whitmore's property, from contacting him except through legal representation, and from taking any action whatsoever regarding the Smokehouse. Violation of this order will result in contempt charges. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Patricia said quietly. As we left the courthouse, Michael put a hand on my shoulder. That's a good first step. Now we focus on the civil suit. We're going to make sure they pay for what they did. But things were about to get even more complicated. 2 days after the restraining order, I got a call from Jennifer Stone, the board member who'd voted against Patricia's Smokehouse crusade. Frank, I need to talk to you. Not as a board member, I resigned yesterday, but there's something you need to know. We met at a coffee shop in Brentwood. Jennifer looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. Patricia has been hiding something from the homeowners. The HOA is in serious financial trouble. What kind of trouble? We're nearly bankrupt. Patricia approved a massive pool renovation last year without getting proper bids or board approval. She gave the contract to her brother-in-law's construction company. They went way over budget, did shoddy work, and now the pool still isn't finished. We're out $300,000 with nothing to show for it. I let out a low whistle. Does anyone know? Douglas knows he's the treasurer, but he's afraid of Patricia. She's threatened to sue him personally if he tells anyone, but the homeowners are going to find out eventually. We're going to have to levy a special assessment just to cover basic maintenance. And now, with your lawsuit, we're facing potentially huge legal fees and damages. The HOA might have to dissolve. I'm not trying to destroy the HOA, I said. I just want them to leave my smokehouse alone. I know. But Patricia went rogue on this. She was convinced that removing your smokehouse would somehow set a precedent that would let her enforce all these other rules she's obsessed with. She thought if she could force you to comply, it would make her look strong and distract from the pool disaster. Instead, she's made everything worse. I told Michael about this conversation, and his eyes lit up. This is useful information. If the HOA's finances are that bad, they'll be desperate to settle. We can use that leverage. The Tennessee Historical Commission completed their full review 3 weeks later. Dr. Walsh called me personally to tell me the news. Frank, I'm delighted to inform you that your smokehouse has been officially listed on the Tennessee State Register of Historic Places. The commission was unanimous in their vote. It's also been nominated for the National Register, which is a longer process, but I'm confident it will be approved. Thank you, Dr. Walsh, for everything. Thank you for preserving it. Not everyone would have fought this hard. And Frank, there's something else. Because your smokehouse is now on the state register, there are grant programs available for historic preservation. If you wanted to do any restoration work, you could potentially get funding for it. Also, if you chose to, you could open it for educational tours. Some homeowners with historic structures do that. It helps promote historic preservation and educates the community. That idea stuck with me. I talked to Emma about it over dinner that night at her favorite Thai restaurant in East Nashville. Dad, that would be amazing. You could teach people about traditional smoking methods, about the history of the area. Grandpa would have loved that. I'm thinking about it, but first, I need to deal with Patricia and this lawsuit. The civil suit moved forward. Discovery revealed what Jennifer had told me: the HOA was indeed in dire financial straits. Patricia had not only approved the pool project without proper authorization, but she'd also failed to properly budget for basic maintenance and had been paying herself a salary that was 3 times what the bylaws allowed. Douglas Murphy, as treasurer, had signed off on everything, apparently too intimidated to stand up to her. Michael filed an amended complaint adding fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Frank, this is bigger than just your smokehouse now. Patricia has been mismanaging the HOA's finances for years. The homeowners deserve to know. The Tennessean newspaper picked up the story. Their investigation revealed even more. Patricia had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, charging dinners at expensive restaurants, buying a new laptop for HOA business that she kept at home, even paying for a vacation to Florida that she claimed was research for community improvement projects. The amounts weren't huge individually, but they added up to tens of thousands of dollars over 3 years. A group of homeowners, led by George Martinez, started a petition to recall the entire board. Within a week, they had signatures from more than 80% of the neighborhood. An emergency homeowners meeting was called. The meeting was held at a local church because the community center wasn't big enough. More than 300 people showed up, and the energy was electric. Patricia tried to call the meeting to order, but she was immediately shouted down. George stood up, holding the petition. Patricia, you've violated your duties as board president. You've mismanaged our finances, engaged in self-dealing, and you attempted to destroy a protected historic structure, exposing this HOA to massive legal liability. This petition calls for your immediate removal, along with Douglas Murphy. Jennifer Stone has already resigned. We're here to vote on new leadership. Patricia's face was scarlet. You can't do this. I'm the president. I've given years to this community. You've taken from this community, someone shouted from the back. A homeowner named Richard Chen, who was an accountant, had been reviewing the HOA's financial records after the news stories broke. He stood up with a thick folder. I've done an analysis of the HOA's finances for the past 3 years. Patricia has paid herself more than $90,000 in salary during that time. The bylaws cap board member compensation at $25,000 annually. She also charged more than $15,000 in personal expenses to the HOA credit card. The pool project, which should have cost $200,000 based on comparable projects, cost us $420,000. And here's the worst part: the work doesn't meet code. We're going to have to rip it all out and start over. That's another $200,000 at minimum. The room erupted. People were shouting, some were crying. The HOA's financial mismanagement meant that every homeowner was going to have to pay more in fees to cover the shortfall. Patricia tried to defend herself. The pool needed to be renovated. It was falling apart. So you gave the contract to your brother-in-law without getting competitive bids, Richard shot back. And let him charge whatever he wanted. That's corruption, Patricia. The vote to remove Patricia and Douglas was overwhelming. Only 2 people voted against it, Patricia and Douglas themselves. A new interim board was elected on the spot, with George as president and Richard as treasurer. After the meeting, George came up to me. "Frank, I'm sorry about all of this. What Patricia did to you was wrong, and it never should have happened. The new board's first priority is going to be cleaning up this mess. We'll be dropping the HOA's defense in your lawsuit. What she did was indefensible." "I appreciate that, George. I never wanted to be at war with my neighbors." The civil suit settled 2 weeks later. The HOA's insurance company, faced with overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing, agreed to pay damages for the trespassing and attempted demolition. They also paid to repair my lawn and fence. The total came to $25,000. More importantly, the settlement included a permanent covenant explicitly protecting my smokehouse and acknowledging the HOA's complete lack of authority over it. But the criminal aspect wasn't over. The Davidson County District Attorney's Office had been reviewing the case, and they decided to file charges against Patricia. She was charged with theft for the misappropriation of HOA funds, fraud for the pool contract scheme, and criminal trespassing for the smokehouse incident. The preliminary hearing was held on a gray Tuesday morning in October. I didn't have to testify. This was just to determine if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial, but I wanted to be there. Michael came with me for moral support. Patricia showed up with a new lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Catherine Foster who looked expensive. The prosecutor, an assistant DA named Marcus Williams, laid out the evidence efficiently. The financial records, the police reports, the witness statements, the documentation from the Tennessee Historical Commission. It was damning. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that the financial issues were matters of civil dispute, not criminal theft, and that the smokehouse incident was a misunderstanding. Judge Raymond Carlson didn't buy it. "Miss Henderson, the evidence suggests a pattern of deliberate misconduct. You repeatedly took actions that you knew were wrong, and you did so for personal benefit. This court finds probable cause to bind you over for trial on all charges." Patricia's face crumpled. For the first time since this whole thing started, she looked genuinely scared. As she left the courtroom, she glanced at me, and I saw something in her eyes, maybe regret, maybe just anger at getting caught. I didn't know which, and I didn't really care. The trial was scheduled for January. In the meantime, life started to return to normal. The new HOA board was actually competent and reasonable. They communicated clearly with homeowners, got the pool situation sorted out with proper contractors, and implemented financial controls to prevent future abuse. Property values, which Patricia had been so obsessed with protecting, actually started going up because people felt confident in the community again. The Smokehouse officially received its National Register designation in November. Dr. Walsh came out for a small ceremony, and Emma organized a little party. We smoked a whole hog to celebrate, using traditional methods. George and a bunch of neighbors came, and we stood around the smokehouse sharing stories and good food. It felt right, using that historic structure the way it was meant to be used, bringing people together. I started giving tours like Dr. Walsh had suggested. One Saturday a month, I'd open up the smokehouse to anyone who wanted to learn about its history and traditional smoking methods. Families would come. Kids would ask questions. And I'd tell them about the Whitfield family and the old farm, about how food preservation used to work, about the craftsmanship that went into building something that could last more than a century. Emma helped me set up a small nonprofit called the Whitfield Heritage Project. We got a grant from the Tennessee Historical Commission to do some restoration work on the smokehouse, reinforcing the foundation, repointing some of the mortar, restoring the interior hooks. The work was done by craftspeople who specialized in historic preservation, and they did it beautifully. Patricia's trial came in mid-January. I attended the first day and the verdict. The prosecution's case was straightforward and devastating. They showed how Patricia had systematically stolen from the HOA, how she'd arranged the pool contract to benefit her brother-in-law in exchange for kickbacks, how she'd attempted to destroy a protected historic structure rather than admit she was wrong. Her defense tried to paint her as a dedicated volunteer who'd made some mistakes in judgment, but had always acted in what she believed were the HOA's best interests. It rang hollow. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Sentencing was set for February. Patricia faced up to 5 years in prison for the theft charges alone. Her lawyer pleaded for leniency, arguing that she was a first-time offender, that she'd already lost her position and reputation, that she was genuinely remorseful. Judge Carlson was unmoved. Miss Henderson, you were entrusted with a position of responsibility in your community. People relied on you to manage their collective resources honestly and fairly. Instead, you stole from them. You used your position for personal gain. And when a homeowner dared to challenge your authority, you attempted to destroy a piece of Tennessee history rather than admit you were wrong. Your actions show a pattern of entitlement and disregard for the law that this court cannot overlook. She sentenced Patricia to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She also ordered full restitution to the HOA for all misappropriated funds, plus fines and court costs. Douglas Murphy, who had cooperated with prosecutors and testified against Patricia, received probation and community service. As Patricia was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, I felt something complicated. Not satisfaction exactly. There was no joy in watching someone's life fall apart, even someone who tried to destroy something I loved. But there was a sense of justice, of accountability. Patricia had hurt a lot of people, and she needed to face consequences. Outside the courthouse, a small group of reporters was waiting. Alicia Grant from News Channel 5 approached me with her microphone. "Mr. Whitmore, how do you feel about today's verdict?" "I think justice was served. This was never really about my smokehouse, not entirely. It was about abuse of power, about someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them. I'm glad the system worked. Your smokehouse is now on the National Register of Historic Places. What are your plans for it?" "I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing. Using it, preserving it, and sharing it with the community. That building has been standing for more than 130 years. I want to make sure it's standing for another 130. Spring came to Nashville the way it always does, with red buds blooming pink against the green hills, and the air turning soft and warm. I was in my backyard on a Saturday morning, preparing the smokehouse for a demonstration I was giving to a group of culinary students from Nashville State Community College. Emma was helping me arrange the wood, making sure we had everything we needed. "Dad, I've been thinking," she said. "What if we wrote a book about the smokehouse? About its history, about traditional smoking techniques, about what happened with the HOA. It could be a way to preserve all of this knowledge and share it with even more people." "That's a great idea. You always were the writer in the family. We could work on it together. Your knowledge, my writing, it could be really special. The students arrived, and I spent the next 3 hours teaching them about fire management, about choosing the right wood for different meats, about patience and tradition. They were fascinated by the building itself, running their hands along the old bricks, marveling at the hand-forged hooks, trying to imagine all the people who'd stood where they were standing over the past century. One young woman, a culinary student named Rachel, asked me, "Was it worth it? All the trouble with the HOA, the legal battles, everything?" I thought about that question. I thought about the stress, the anger, the nights I couldn't sleep. I thought about standing in my yard watching a bulldozer aim for my smokehouse, about the weight of documents and lawyer meetings and court appearances. But then I looked at the smokehouse itself, solid and proud, smoke curling from its chimney like it had for more than 100 years. I thought about Emma's face when she'd hugged me and said we couldn't let them win. I thought about the families who came to the tours, the kids who learned about history, the community that had come together. "Yeah," I said, "it was worth it. Some things are worth fighting for." That summer, the Whitfield Heritage Project held its first annual community barbecue. More than 500 people came. We had live music, kids' activities, and tours of the smokehouse running all day. Local chefs demonstrated different smoking techniques, and we sold plates of traditionally smoked meats, with all the proceeds going to historic preservation projects in Davidson County. George gave a speech as HOA president. A year ago, this neighborhood was divided. We had leadership that had lost its way, that cared more about control than community. One man stood up to that, and in doing so, he helped all of us find our way back. Frank Whitmore didn't just save a historic smokehouse. He reminded us what communities are supposed to be about: neighbors helping neighbors, preserving what matters and standing up for what's right. On behalf of everyone in Meadowbrook Commons, thank you. The applause was overwhelming. I felt Emma squeeze my hand, and I saw tears in her eyes. Later that afternoon, when the crowds had thinned and the sun was getting low, I stood alone by the smokehouse. The party cleanup was happening around me, but I took a moment to just be still. I put my hand on the brick wall, still warm from the day's sun, and I thought about all the hands that had touched these same bricks over the decades. Farmers and homesteaders, families preserving their winter meat, people whose names were lost to history but whose work remained. Patricia Henderson was in prison, serving her sentence. The HOA had recovered most of the stolen money through seizure of her assets and wage garnishment. Douglas Murphy was doing his community service, apparently working at a food bank, according to someone who'd seen him there. The neighborhood had healed, stronger for having faced its crisis and come through it. And the smokehouse stood, protected by law, preserved for future generations, still serving its purpose more than a century after someone had carefully laid each brick. It had survived the subdivision of the farm, the development of the neighborhood, and an HOA president who'd wanted to erase it. It would survive long after I was gone, a testament to craftsmanship and tradition and the importance of fighting for what matters. Emma came over and stood beside me. "What are you thinking about?" "About Grandpa. About how he'd love knowing that we saved this place. About how good it feels to win sometimes." "You did more than win, Dad. You protected something important. You stood up to someone who was used to getting her way through bullying and intimidation. And you showed everyone else that they could stand up too." The last of the sunset light was catching the smokehouse chimney, making the old bricks glow like embers. Smoke from the day's demonstrations had left a new layer of darkness on the interior walls, adding to the patina of a century and a half of use. Somewhere in the neighborhood, I could hear children playing, their laughter carrying on the evening air. I'd bought this house 3 years ago looking for a fresh start after my divorce, looking for a place where Emma and I could build new traditions. I'd never imagined that a 130-year-old building would become the center of a battle that would test everything I believed about standing up for what's right. I'd never imagined that I'd become someone who fought HOA board presidents and appeared on the news and worked with historic preservation commissions. But life surprises you. Sometimes the fight finds you whether you want it or not. And sometimes, if you're lucky and stubborn and you have good people on your side, you win. The Smokehouse stood solid behind me, its door slightly ajar, its walls holding more than a century of stories. It would be there tomorrow when I came out to check on it, and the day after that, and the day after that. It would be there for Emma's kids someday, and their kids after them. It would stand as proof that some things matter enough to fight for, and that ordinary people can stand up to bullies and win. As darkness fell over Nashville and the first stars appeared above my backyard, I closed up the Smokehouse for the night, checking the dampers and making sure everything was secure. The ritual was familiar now, comfortable, connecting me to all the people who'd done this same task over the decades. I walked back to my house, the grass soft under my feet where it had regrown over the bulldozer tracks, and I felt at peace. Some battles you don't choose. Some battles choose you. But when they do, when something you love is threatened by people who think power means they can do whatever they want, you stand up. You fight. And sometimes, if you're lucky, justice prevails. The Smokehouse lights were off now, but its presence remained, a dark, solid shape against the night sky. Protected by law, preserved by determination, and standing as proof that one person who refuses to back down can make a difference. That was worth everything.